Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Lies of P on PS5. The decades of Disneyfication of old stories, fables, and fiction has done great things for the bottom line of the House of Mouse, but has done great harm to the understanding of fiction and its place in the human experience. Most of these old stories were not for children, or for teaching children in a different time when we did not coddle so much, for when children were considered truly immature, little more than larvae, and were not held as much more than incomplete adults who needed hard lessons in how the society in which they had been born actually worked, and the young were not the worship objects they had become. One such story is our topic for today. Let's get into it with 2023's Lies of P. Oh, do you want examples of how these fables have been altered? Sure, let's discuss that. Snow White was never asleep. She was in fact dead, and the prince decided to violate her corpse to bring her back to life. Cinderella features self-mutilation to fit an ideal to impress a wealthy man in a time of extreme poverty. The Little Mermaid gave up her hair and singing voice as a sea monster for a human prince who rejected her, and instead of murdering him, she kills herself but gains an immortal Christian soul for her sacrifice. And of course, the tale of Pinocchio was all about a little wooden puppet known for telling outrageous lies, and how lying little boys, as part of the society, usually get the shitty and very sharp end of the stick, particularly when the ruling authority thrusts it through their heart, and maybe should always be truthful. A lesson we have lost when we turn them loose in the modern corporate world, and they are rewarded for outrageous lies. But again, those were different times, and no one in their right mind now would be telling first graders tales of rape and murder to scare the fuck out of them so they can act right. But then again, a lot of parents today are avid horror fans, or constant consumers of biased news cycles, or have had one too many run ins with the law, and their children are given free and unsupervised reign online. So many kids are arriving at first grade already knowing in depth what rape and murder is all about and why it is cool. But I'm not here to opine on parenting styles when I don't have much interest in being a parent. I'm here to talk about video games. Lies of P is very, very loosely based on the writings of Carlo Lorenzini, better known by his pen name Carlo Collodi, an Italian author and humorist who wrote the original Adventures of Pinocchio back in 1883. And when I say loosely, I mean a lying human-like puppet and some names attached to the story is about all we have connecting this game to the novel. We have NeoWiz Games and Round 8 Studios to thank for that, this South Korean developer who have made a huge splash with this title. They took the From Software Souls-like formula and walked it into a direction no one was really expecting, adapting a Western fairy tale rather than the idea of Western time periods. Many fans have called Lies of P a Bloodborne 2, alluding to the system and overall dark Victorian feel that Bloodborne utilized, especially since it would seem From Software and Sony have abandoned the property despite fan outcry for more of a direct sequel. Personally, I like the term Puppetborn. That seems more appropriate. But in reality, Lies of P is a clone of the first Dark Souls, only with less shields and more mobility. Is that a bad thing? Hell no, it's not. It just may not be what we were expecting exactly. In any case, you play Pinocchio, only not the Disney version made of wood and string and being followed by a narc grasshopper. You are, for all purposes, an ethereally handsome android, a K-pop superstar in robotic form, with a metal left arm who twitches and clicks as your gears and springs wind down, which is as capable and articulated as a machine as anything the Weyland-Yutani Corporation produced in the Alien franchise. You are essentially a slave, devoid of personality or humanity. You're not supposed to be. You are supposed to be a home good. The problem is you have a soul, a spark of life, and are free-willed and capable of telling lies to get what you want. You awaken in the back of a train car in a surgeon's chair, stumbling forward and following a woman's voice calling out to you to awaken and meet her. The first thing you find are three weapons symbolizing strength, agility, or balance. So deciding how you want to start the game as a heavy but slow hitter, a fast but light hitter, or something in between. This being a Souls-like, that basically means nothing as you progress and build your character. And with the wealth of options of weapons you will find throughout the game, how you start hardly matters. You will not find any magic though, so all combat is visceral melee, unless you count throwable objects as magic. Stumbling into the damaged train station in the city of Krat, you find the dead strewn messily about, and among them servitor and police puppets, like you, but less fancy or pretty than you, juddering about and slaying the living. You have arrived in the midst of the puppet frenzy, a localized apocalypse where the androids gained some level of sentience all of a sudden and rose up to kill mortals, slaughtering men, women, and children without mercy. Worse, there is a plague upon Krat, known as the petrification disease, which turns humans into stone-like, acid-spewing zombies. A bad day not to be a real boy, I suppose. From this killing field, Pinocchio must make his way to Hotel Krat, the last fortified bastion of survivors in town, where the woman who summoned you is waiting, along with others. Your first test of your progress and skills is a giant clown puppet that blocks your way to the hotel. And if you played something like Bloodborne or Sekiro, then you already know how this thing plays out. Dodge like mad or stay close to its butt, stabbing it with whatever weapon you picked up. Once you put down the clown, your next test is how well you lie. Turns out puppets follow Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, or they're supposed to anyway. And if Pinocchio can lie to the hotel's automated defense systems, a binary choice, this isn't an RPG after all, you will be let in. Once inside, you meet the woman who called you, Sophia the Blue Fairy, who explains a bit about what is going on and how you, in your unique position, needs to get to the bottom of it. Sophia gives you a lantern containing Gemini. If you didn't hear it right, it does sound a lot like Jiminy, who will be your guide, but not your conscience. That you'll have to find on your own. Also, in the hotel is the owner, Lady Antonia, and her puppet servitor, Polinda, who it turns out is also sentient and has fallen in love with the lady, and a weaponsmith named Eugenie. Your first task is to find Geppetto, the originator of the puppets, as he might know what started the puppet frenzy. Along the way, Pinocchio fights puppets and a new breed of killer known as the Stalker, animal masked wearing puppet destroyers who are in no way trustworthy. He will cross paths with the Fox and Black Cat, and will fight the Black Rabbit Brotherhood in a 4-on-1 melee more than once, but will also stumble upon a German Shepherd masked treasure hunter, a donkey-headed killer, and a weasel-masked madman. Geppetto is found early on, and treats Pinocchio as his son, much like we are familiar with. But Pinocchio is more like his greatest creation, the final result of years of hard work. Pinocchio will also have to rescue several other figures before the end of the story. Lorenzini Vanini, industrialist and manufacturer in Pinocchio's left arms, which come in a multitude of lightning, fire, acid, or explosive flavors, and a decipherer of cryptic puzzles, and his own puppet servant. You will also need to find a merchant named Giangio, who is interested in the coin fruit tree Hotel Krat's property sits on, a stalker named Belle, and a cat that you can use as a metric of your own humanity. Outside the hotel, there are a few merchant survivors or unaligned sentient puppets, but mostly it is Pinocchio versus the android horde. About halfway through the game, he begins to fight victims of the petrification disease alongside the puppets, uncovering a dark conspiracy around a man named Simon Malice, leader of the alchemists, who may have started this disease to turn the citizens of Krat into vessels for his mad sacrifice to become God, by which I mean turn himself into a being capable of dethroning the Christian God and ruling a world of death and destruction. By game's end, you will have killed the king of puppets, the focus of the puppet frenzy, but not the man behind it, destroyed the stalkers, discovered a puppet serial killer, seen the real form of Sophia outside of her blue fairy disguise, learned what is the nature of Ergo, this game's blood echoes or souls, and is both experience and currency. It's souls, human souls, that's the secret, and slain Malice, stopping his plan to kill God. But that is hardly the end, for Geppetto reveals who he truly is, the man behind the puppets and the puppet frenzy, which he did to help everyone in Krot survive the petrification disease by transferring their living souls into machines who cannot get sick against their wills. But when they began to wake up and realize what happened to them, they went crazy. And, spoilers ahead, that Pinocchio is not in fact the original version of himself. If you have lied enough and saved everyone you can, you discover the game's final and optional boss, your original form, the nameless puppet, also known as Carlo, Geppetto's actual son who died of the plague before the game begins, and whose ergo powers your character Pinocchio. And now you have grown powerful enough to kill a would-be god. And that result, he demands you give up your heart to power Carlo's puppet. Turns out lying is good, because if you told too many fibs, you can refuse to give over your heart, and fight a boss on par with the strength of Bloodborne's Orphan of Kos or Elden Ring's Millennia. And defeating it gives you the optional good ending. Giving up, which I did after 2 straight days of trying to fight this thing, even seeking out YouTube videos and write-ups on how to fix what I was doing wrong, nets you the canonical bad ending, where your heart powers the Carlo puppet, in which Geppetto sends it to kill the survivors of Hotel Krot and makes Krot safe for Carlo, a grieving father's mad ambition, and that's it. The good ending allows Geppetto to die at the nameless puppet's hands once he realizes the real Carlo's soul is already bonded to Pinocchio, and watching Pinocchio cry over his death gives him peace. Both endings reveal that the weird coin fruit merchant Giangio was in fact a government spy named Philippus Paracelsus, who was spying on the Krot experiment, as he calls it, and that this would certainly summon the real target, a stalker named Dorothy, which leads into a quick image of a woman in ruby slippers walking casually along Krot's rooftops, who stops long enough to click her heels together 3 times. Well, that's a wild and out of left field ending. So that is the plot of Lies of P in a nutshell. The story of a grimdark Pinocchio in a city of slaughter used to draw out a totally different fabled character, one from something Disney was not able to obtain the rights to, and transform it into a different kind of cultural monster. Amazing what you can do if the property rights fall into the public domain like that. It's almost like corporations shouldn't keep indefinite rights on something. Anyway, there are a few twists and turns that are certainly enjoyable, especially if you already like this sort of thing. But Lies of P is very much a game for the people who play games in the Souls category, with an odd sequel bait ending at the end of it. While not a bloody game, Lies of P is deeply visceral, with your character being sprayed in oil and green infected blood throughout the game, as you rip your enemies apart with swords, hammers, chainsaw blades, spears, axes, and the like. There are no firearms available. Like I said, this does play more like the first Dark Souls, but with slightly more mobility. Nor do you get shields to hide behind. Defending with your weapon allows you to recover some health in a short amount of time, though. You can spend Ergo on a short list of familiar statistics under funny names, such as strength, health, agility, stamina, weight bearing, and your metal arm, and quartz crystals can be found to modify your P organ, a bad translation of the mechanical heart in your character's chest. Those familiar with conversational Korean say it should have been more closely translated as blood organ. To add more recovery vials to your health abilities, use special abilities tied to your weapon fixing ability, and all sorts of latent and passive abilities. But choose carefully as quartz is limited. Lies of P is a worthy addition to the Soulslikes, and to be honest, it is done well enough. It should have been included in the family of the Souls Inheritors, although a Japanese company would never allow a Korean company to be lumped in with their august pantheon of games. Critics of the game found it also acceptable, roughly having it end up with the 80-ish out of 100 category on Metacritic. So pretty good for a game that came out of nowhere, and which even the developers have said was developed the way it was to appeal to a Western audience. Again, an odd idea, because we're not all clamoring for a Pinocchio-based video game. If anything, the masses want the same Call of Duty, but different, especially if you can throw in Fortnite and Roblox into the mix. But hey, it's not the first time East and West have misunderstood one another. Critics definitely noted that Bloodborne and Dark Souls' abilities and mechanics, done quite well, and were a fresh take on a dead property. But what are my final thoughts on this game now that I've drawn a close on the property? Well, Lies of P is awesome. If you love From Software games, it's more of the same. If you don't like From Software games, there's not a fucking thing you will be finding likable about this game. It's an extremely polished, if you like this sort of thing that will be the sort of thing you like, game. We have tons of them in this hobby. The use of a familiar story we've all had in the back of our minds since childhood to tell something new was particularly inspired. The use of a license without having to get tied up in license fights we see so often in entertainment properties in the current day is also a good thing. I have very little to address as a negative, except that the final battle that is required to get the good ending. Let me talk about that for a bit. Yes, I get the idea that it's supposed to be challenging. I get the idea that a lot of these games have some sort of super boss, a direct line of thought from the developers to players that you should, by now, be able to play perfectly. Hell no, I cannot. I realize this may just be a me thing. I realize I'm getting old and my hands don't have the reflexes that they used to, but that kinda does piss me off. If you're going to make a game with optional endings, they should not be tied to whether you can play perfectly, as dictated by a developer who built the game from the ground up and knows the code inside out. That's the domain of professional players who don't have to worry about day jobs and families, and all they do is play games for a living. It's an unrealistic metric. If you are going to use optional difficulty, I should have the option to not engage with it and still get a satisfying conclusion. As I said earlier, I spent 2 days, several hour sessions each, and seeking out YouTube videos to try and find out how to defeat this boss. The end of the story was this: I didn't build my character quote unquote correctly to defeat the final boss, was unable to last minute respec the character, and I didn't want to anyway, and I just couldn't get my fingers to wrap around the controller with the speed and accuracy needed to stop this boss in less than 2 minutes. So fuck that shit. I have things to do, and I don't get paid for this. So I took the bad ending just to get the credits to roll and complete the title. I hate to get all the way to the game's end and have to quit, that's hardly fun, but I'll leave the final boss and the good ending of Lies of P to younger players who can judge each other on their bullshit game skills, like they do in non-professional level sports, and jerk each other off about their good games, bro. Fuck you. Otherwise, yeah, great game. Highly recommend. Would play a sequel. Yes, we have seen a lot of Soulslikes in the last decade, and I'm sure a lot of players are becoming tired of them. I know a lot of Souls ideas have become a formula, often mixed with something like a Metroidvania, still calling that, sorry not sorry, kiss my ass, or maybe Legend of Zelda structures and clones, which have all been an evolutionary adaptation, the same way breathing air was an adaptation from drawing oxygen from water molecules when life moved from the seas to land. It was inevitable. But Lies of P is proof that the Souls formula is still viable over a decade on, as popular as ever, with no signs of slowing down. Maybe evolving into other forms, but the core of it is a solid idea that doesn't need to rely on badly interpreted Western cultural fantasy tropes and can be adapted to other formulas or ideas more modern than knights in armor and dark Gandalf ripoffs. I'd be curious to see what other Left Behind stories we could adapt to this style of game. A Moby Dick, where the hero carries a sword named Ishmael? A Dracula-like, where Bram Stoker is the real vampire hunter journaling his own experiences with the undead? A game where the gray mongoose Ricky Tikki Tavi fights snakes in a bloodborne environment to save his family. Oh, wait, even better. A Hamlet like, leveling up his stats through the skull of Yorick. Alas, we knew him. The mind absolutely boggles. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mast Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.